In today's journey, we take a whack at brewing the world's smallest beer, for no other reason than the fact that we can. Or more accurately, try and technically succeed. But that's why we do these experiments, to see what we can do better next time. Today's recipe includes 0.025 ounces of dry malt extract, 0.008 ounces of New Zealand green bullet hops, and where we made the mistake, we add 0.008 ounces of Safale 05 yeast. Way too much. However, the 0.0001 ounces seen on camera would have been the right amount to add. Unfortunately, Phil forgot to sanitize that vessel, so he had to reweigh later and weighed out the wrong amount. Our final ingredient is 25 milliliters of spring water, which we are planning to boil down to about 10 milliliters by the end. During this batch, we decided to add the malt extract and the hops pre-boil so that we can watch as they react to the temperature changes. At this point, the water is 68 degrees Fahrenheit, as that is the temperature of our room. Although that is about to change as we are about to apply the heat now. Applying heat now. Thank you for that update, Phil. We will of course be using some of our fancy time-lapse manipulation, but now we added a timer so that you can actually see how much time has gone by and when we're actually manipulating it. Like right now. Although we will take a break right here so that Phil can put the watch glass on top as a lid to prevent as much boil off from happening as possible. And here's why we added the hops and everything earlier, so that we can see the natural convection of everything being moved around as the temperature increases. Unfortunately, at this point, Phil takes a temperature, but doesn't tell us what it is. It's not a boil yet, though. It seems that he's gotten a bit distracted by trying to break up the last of the malt extract in there. Although he may be trying to break up that hop thinking it's malt extract. And now that he's done with his subpar comic relief, we can move on to the more scientific sections. Such as watching this hop pellet dissolve in the hotter temperature now. We believe this to be the beginning of the isomerization process for the hops, it being probably about 175 degrees Fahrenheit inside the vessel. We will have to be sure to keep better track of our temperatures in the future using the custom thermometers we plan to build next week. Much of today's experiment was figuring out exactly how much to put in, as many calculators for figuring out recipes do not go down this small. If you have the urge to build your own recipe this size, we recommend using the value of 0.00666 gallons for your batch size. Now check out this sweet boil over. It was actually completely intentional and conveniently easy to clean up due to its small size. And I'm as surprised as you are that Phil actually used his safety gear. Things are going to be pretty straightforward from here, but because we lost a lot of hops during the boil off, we're going to add more now, in the amount of another 0.008 ounces of New Zealand green bullet hops. We also add these at this point so that we can see the reaction of adding hops to an already boiling kettle. As you can see, if you are already close to a boil over, that is something that could cause a problem, even on larger setups. It should be noted that even though we are brewing tiny, everything should remain proportional to as if we were brewing in a larger scale. Which is why I alluded to saying technically successful earlier. Because we now have a 2-to-1 ratio of malt extract to hops at this point. That is a little off of what you would normally see for a 5-gallon batch. Now let's see if we can keep this under a 5-minute video by really putting the spurs to that fast forward. And just look at how concentrated those hop particles are getting in there. Yowza. Another big part of today's experiment was finding out exactly what settings work best on our hot plate to maintain a boil that is not excessive. This is in order to maintain a minimal amount of boil off. For our records, the 4.5 setting is what maintained the best. Now that we've come to the end of our 40-minute boil, we can see how far down our 25 milliliters has come. It looks like it's still 15, but I'll bet you we'll end up with even less once we cool it down. And to do that, we first must get rid of the hot plate and move over to our soon-to-be cold plate, but currently just known as a lab jack. Luckily, one of the best parts about brewing such a small amount is that it will cool down very quickly. Especially since, even without modification, the lab jack is a giant piece of metal that will act as a heat sink for the vessel. But luckily, we won't have to wait the full 18 minutes this takes to come down to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, as we are going to fast forward. With the brew part done of the brew day, we now need to transfer. And our way of avoiding any loss is to use a syringe to do all of our transfers instead of using any other more traditional tools. And to keep with our laboratory-based equipment, we will be transferring this to a 10 milliliter separatorial funnel, which is basically a glass conical fermenter without any extra ports. And this is actually something really hard to do, as we are dealing with such small amounts. There is very little room for error on sucking up all the hop residue on the bottom and completely knocking everything over, with the smallest misstep of using the plunger on the syringe. And yes, everything is sanitized as we would expect it to be in a lab environment. We do try to soak up something from the hop juices to see if we can get a reading off of that, but unfortunately it is not accurate enough, so we will have to use some from the actual vessel itself. We do this by extracting a small sample using a 1 milliliter syringe and try to take out as minimal amount as possible. So, no hydrometers for us. We will be stuck with refractometers whenever we brew this small. A typical hydrometer would need more of 100 milliliters of liquid to do a proper test. So we would need to brew 10 more batches just to have enough to do a hydrometer reading. This test method is something that we're going to have to experiment with to make sure that we're getting proper readings, as this may not have actually been enough to get a full reading. That or Phil's math was just completely wrong, as we ended up with a 10-15 beer, which is going to make for a unique profile given the amount of hops that are in there proportionately. Unfortunately, this concludes our planned part of the experiment. Check in next time when we do some other weird, crazy stuff that might be useful or completely irrelevant. You never know. But we do have some shots of the fermentation vessel after being pitched. Please note the excessive amount of yeast that is in there compared to the amount of wort.